everyone to the Women's Fund of Rhode Island Gubernatorial Forum. My name is Kelly Evans, and I am the Executive Director of the Women's Fund. Been with the organization for just a year and a half. I've been knocking around the nonprofit arena for quite a while, but this is my first foray into the semi-political arena, so this is an exciting evening for me. I want to start off by saying thank you to our sponsor, Hinkley Allen, who made tonight's event possible, as well as our volunteers and our candidates. I want to say special thanks to Helen Metter from URI, who helped to plan this event, and also our moderator, who I will introduce shortly, who will then introduce our candidates. I do briefly want to tell you about the Women's Fund. Our mission is to invest in women and girls, and we do that through research, advocacy, grant making, and strategic partnerships designed to advance gender equity in Rhode Island. We do have an information table out front. As a 501c3 charitable organization, we cannot and do not endorse candidates. However, it's important to us to be involved in advocacy for the issues that we feel are important and help to level the playing field for women in Rhode Island. For tonight's event, we do have a couple of rules, and hopefully most of you registered online, so you got them ahead of time. We are asking that there's no applause or any kind of noise to show approval or disapproval for anything that the candidates are saying. We ask that you not wave things in the air. I'm glad there's no balloons in here. We really want to maximize the time that we have here with our candidates to hear their thoughts, their stance on the different issues and the questions that we are presenting this evening. If you take pictures, please turn off your flash. And again, please feel free to share what's going on with social media. So it's my pleasure tonight to also introduce another volunteer who made tonight's program possible, and that is Maureen Motley. She is a professor of political science at the University of Rhode Island. She teaches American government, state politics, and media and politics. She also writes extensively on state politics, and she's a regular political commentator on state politics on both Rhode Island PBS and NPR, where I listen to her every Friday morning. So thank you, Maureen, and I'll turn this program over to you.
Good evening, and thank you for coming to this evening's forum on women's policy issues. And special thanks to our panelists, candidates for governor, who have agreed to share their views on issues critical to women's concerns. This is an important political time for women in terms of addressing timely policy concerns we all have about women's economic and political empowerment in a rapidly changing environment. We hope that this evening's conversation can give us a clearer picture of how candidates for governor see their role in this exciting and challenging time. I will briefly identify our top panelists, and after clarifying some basic rules, we'll ask each panelist to briefly introduce themselves before we begin our formal questions. Going from my right, our panelists are Matt Brown, former Secretary of State who is running in the Democratic primary, Louis Daniel Nunez, who is running in a physician who's running in the Democratic primary, Paul Rosselli, who is the is the warden and secretary of Burwell Ward of Campuses, who is also running in the Democratic primary. I gotta get this. Giovanni Feroci, a former state rep and business entrepreneur, who is running in the Republican primary, and Spencer Dickinson, a former representative who is running in the Democratic primary. Okay. First, a few rules. We will give each panelist 2 minutes to introduce themselves and tell us why they think they are the right candidate for governor to address women's issues. We will then proceed with the questions, allowing each panelist 2 minutes to answer. Our timekeeper will signal when we are at the 30-second point for each answer. Each candidate will also be given 2 rebuttal cards, which will allow them 2 one-minute rebuttals. Again, we will be fairly strict in terms of allotted time, and do ask the panelists please to respect the obvious time constraints of this forum. So, I'll begin to my right and start with Matt Brown. Would you please introduce yourself and tell us why you think you're the right candidate for governor to address women's issues?
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Kelly and the Women's Fund, and to thank you, Maureen. It's very nice to see you. I think we also should acknowledge that the fact that the women candidates in this race, and there are women candidates, aren't here, which is unfortunate. I wish they were. Women's issues are not just women's issues. They have to do with the values that we hold as a society. We're not going to be the society we want to be as long as women don't have equal rights, don't have access to health care and reproductive care, and have to live in fear of sexual harassment, assault, and abuse. And in my view, on all these counts, we have a very, very long way to go. I have the benefit of having grown up with some very strong women who have been fighters for women's rights. My great-grandmother, Mabel Adams Thompson, was a suffragette. And I actually remember, I was a little boy when she died, but she lived to an old age, and I remember her formidable presence extremely well, along with her pies and her humor. But of course, I learned about her as I grew up, and her as a leader in the fight for the women's right to vote over a century ago. My mother carried that torch forward, and to give you a sense of, some of you here who are old friends have heard this story, but a sense of how strong a fighter she was for social justice, civil rights, and she was very active in the women's rights movement. I'm getting cut off. Okay. So she very quickly, my mother went into labor at the biggest march against the Vietnam War in Washington. A couple 100,000 people there. Joan Baez was playing. She went into labor, as my dad says, they made a train as he said, train of hippies to get her out to the sidewalk. They did get out to the hospital, and I was born. So I was born into the social justice movement. I was on her hip from day one, and have tried my best to continue the legacy of my family and the strong women in it to fight for women's rights throughout my life. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Nunez.
Hi, thank you for having me here. Just to clarify, independent candidate for governor. Not a practicing medical doctor, but my background, my life, I would say, started in the projects of the Bronx in New York City. I grew up with a mom who was a single mom and 5 kids. And I saw her struggle, but still fight to give us a better life. And a lot of the successes I've had in medicine and in industry is because she instilled those values in me in terms of work ethic and really a willingness to confront the system and injustices. So social justice, in my perspective, is economic justice. And when I look at women's issues and opportunity as it relates to that area, I think that we need to really start to look at a type of systemic change that begins with really helping those single mothers access better paying jobs, helping them really restore the presence that they want to have in their children's lives, giving them access to high quality health care, not only that's restricted to brick and mortar, but that's accessible even in home. These are ways that I believe my mother would have had a much better, or I would say easier time as a single mother. And if we begin there, I think really that level of economic opportunity and justice will spill out into all other women of different age groups and of different demographics. So what I hope to share today is my vision and how programmatically I believe we can create this change. And again, a change that isn't just about social justice or headlines or statements, but one that is sustainable, that helps women grow as individuals and helps them really make the rest of society, the rest of us, much better. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rosselli?
Well, thank you, and certainly thank Kelly and Maureen for this opportunity to speak. And thank you for all of you for attending. So tonight I have a feeling everybody's going to be talking about their mothers and their sisters and their daughters, and just for the record, my daughter, my mother, my sisters are the best anywhere in the world. And
Can I rebut that right off the bat?
Red card.
and we all grew up in a house that's there today in what's now known as the North End of Providence. And I could wax eloquence, and I could spend hours talking about history and background. But let's go to the present. I'm here tonight to tell you that I'm the only candidate here that will make sure we don't lose ground. To make sure that we don't go back to the 1920s, the 1930s, the 1940s, whether it's voting rights, women's rights, reproductive rights, economic justice, that we don't go backwards. Because that's why we're here tonight. We're not here to talk about what we aspire to or what we hope for the future. Well, yeah, I want to talk about that, don't get me wrong. But I want to make sure we don't lose ground. Because if we start to lose ground, it doesn't matter. We're going backwards. Our federal government, our state government is taking us to a place that I thought we had ended long ago. And it's time for someone to get up here and say, enough is enough. We're not going to go backwards anymore, we're going to go forward. And that's why I'm here tonight.
Thank you. Mr. DeRoshi?
Hi, good evening. I too want to say thank you to all those involved in putting this together, fellow panelists, and certainly you all for attending. I'm going to try and time the clock here. So quick 30 seconds on my background. Italian immigrant, born in Lugano, Switzerland, grew up in West Warwick. My parents worked in factories, I went to public schools, went to the University of Rhode Island, did the simultaneous membership program in the Army, was enlisted in the Army, then became an officer. Ferocious Eyes Optical Center, if you haven't heard of it, I named it after Betty Davis Eyes. She's ferocious, the song. My father was legally blind. My brother graduated from Rick. I was a state senator, not a rep, a state senator, one of the youngest in the country back when I was 24. Just sticking on the bio stuff for a minute. I had two careers, really. I had a military career and a business career. And so for a period of time after 9/11, approximately 5 years straight, I was on active duty. So that's where I built all the systems and the standards that I then applied to business. And most of you might know me, or those that will get to know me will know me for being the former CEO of Alex & Donnie. Carolyn Raphalian, my partner at the time, she landed on the cover of Forbes magazine last year. So I have a lot to offer this evening. Most of it will be obviously economic in nature. I have a lot of statistics, just glass ceilings that I broke intentionally. And that's what I'm here to offer you tonight. And most important, what I will be talking about for the balance of the time is I represent the future. So I appreciate the past and all this other stuff, but I'm all about the future. And you need to be on one of three paths, either a path of education, a path of employment, or a path of retirement. And all three need to lead you into prosperity. And remember me as the blockchain governor, okay? Because I'm going to introduce the blockchain to Rhode Island in such massive ways that will completely change the state forever. Thank you very much.
Mr. Dickinson?
Thank you, and I also thank you for organizing this event and all of you out there for being here. I'm here to learn, and I'm counting on some tough questions, and I may look beat up when I leave here tonight, but I'll be a lot better off than when I came in. It turns out I have something in common with a couple of people here. The day that Matt Brown was born, I was out there on the green in Washington with 800,000 people trying to deliver a message to Richard Nixon, and it took a while, but we did deliver that message. And it turns out that the gentleman on my left was born in one of my favorite cities, and my wife's up there, she's hearing this, and she knows what I'm about to say, Lugano. I love it. There's no other place like it. And part of my platform, since we brought this up, maybe we should make Providence a lot like Lugano. And anybody wonders about that, get an airplane ticket, take a ride over there, get off in Milan, rent a car, drive up to Lugano, walk around there, and come back and make Providence different, because it could be just like Lugano. My background includes, well, I should tell you who my advisors are. I'm very happy that my wife is here today. I'm not so sure she's happy and comfortable watching me, but two of my other advisors are my daughter, my older daughter Betsy, and my younger daughter Sarah. Betsy is a 7th grade teacher. Unfortunately, She has the problem a lot of Rhode Island kids have, which is you got to go live someplace else. And she lives in the Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C. area. My other daughter, Sarah, owns her own business. She does extremely well, and I expect to see one of these buildings named after her. Very quickly to continue, I am a home builder. I have worked as a systems analyst at Prudential Insurance and Citizens Bank. I know what organization looks like. I also served in the Army, learned a great deal from it, served 12 years in the legislature, and the thing that I learned from the 12 years in the legislature is you're going to have people with different viewpoints. It's worth making the effort to come to a consensus, and you don't leave anybody behind. Thank you.
All right, we're going to rotate the questions to my right. So the next question will be for Mr. Munoz. You can start. Across the country, we're seeing legislation that eliminates funding for access to abortion, as well as general reproductive health services. Studies show that women can choose, when women can choose when and how to build their families, there are better economic outcomes. So the question is, as governor, how will you use state resources to ensure access to reproductive health care if federal legislation succeeds in removing providers like Planned Parenthood from Medicaid and Title X funding? And also, will you work actively to pass a law guaranteeing the right to abortion in Rhode Island if it falls at the national level? So we'll start with Mr. Munoz.
Yeah, it's a heavy question, but an important one. And so let me be clear. I believe that women as men should be masters of their own body. I believe that women should have autonomy over their health care. I believe that as we see the potential for a repeal or some threat against Roe versus Wade, that law, as I see it, is one that reduces the likelihood that women will be persecuted, right, or that their rights will be taken away in terms of their health care. So, in summary, relates to the law, I'm fine with there being a direct replica, a reflection, if you will, of Roe versus Wade at the state level. What I think I would want to navigate carefully is whether it's not a pure reflection and whether there's an introduction of new language and what that language is. And I think the legislature should take its role in seeing, negotiating that and talking about it. In terms of healthcare, what I believe where we're lacking, if you look at the proportion of women of color that have abortions as compared to women who are not of color, I would like to see more resources poured into objective health education. And I think accessibility to health education is always a problem in healthcare, especially when it's restricted to brick and mortar. So my belief is that we should really be providing telemedicine, Skype for doctors, if you will, educational resources that are available to women across the spectrum of demographics and neighborhoods, rather rural or urban. If we do these things, and I truly believe that if the moral imperative is to maximize the potential of all life and to reduce the incidence, the need, not the right, but the need for an abortion, and over time by investing in health education using technology to improve its access, we'll see a reduction in abortion. So that's my overall perspective on the matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Marcelli?
Sure. Sure. So I worked as a documentary filmmaker, been a documentary filmmaker for 30 years, traveled a lot of the globe. I learned about healthcare when I was in Norway, and I learned that reproductive rights, reproductive health care, services for women are just part of the ordinary thing that they do. That's the way they do health care there. And then when we come back here, there are all these restrictions. And with the federal government now in power and the state government following suit, it seems to be that those restrictions are taking place more and more. We've got to codify Roe versus Wade. There's no way out of that. The state legislatures have to do it. There's a couple of bills already there. They need to move forward. They need to get out of committee. They need to go to the House and the Senate. And there needs to be a vote. And if the people here don't like the vote, vote them out. Get rid of them. Put somebody else in place. Because this is the year 2018. This is not 2005. This is not 1905. This is 2018. It's time that we trust women to make the decisions that they need to make. And let's move on with that. I'm always fascinated by these forums on women, because here we are again, and I know I said that in my introduction, but I'm going to say it again, because here we are again. At some point, we've got to put these things, we've got to fully fund Medicaid to let abortion services take place. We've got to do education right from the start. We've got to give women the responsibility and the tools necessary to control their own bodies and their own future. And that's the end of the story. That's got to be the end of the story, because we can't keep going on and on, giving women every once in a while a kick in the pants, sorry, but a kick in the pants saying, sorry, you know, we're going to take your rights away once again. Enough is enough.
Thank you, Mr. Morosi.
Okay, I'm really hoping that this year people will vote, if you agree, 8 out of 10 things, not 100% of the time with someone. You know, tonight was an easy decision to come. I'll tell you that, because I do want to meet people and I want to meet everyone. And I think everyone should be here as a candidate. But I'm not going to lie to you, I was a little bit concerned that, you know, everything would be about this question and where would I fall in the conversation here. Reality is, I don't want to talk about blockchain. Reality is, I want to talk about the future. I don't want to. I look at what our legislators spend time on. I have 3 girls. I have 5 children, but I have 3 girls. And they won't watch TV with me anymore because I have it on Capital TV, you know, and it's boring. And they're talking about things that are important, but we're missing some of the big things we should be talking about, the really massive things, right? And we're always talking about a little bit more of this, a little bit more of that. This is my answer. I'm not a promoter of any type of legislation in this area. I just don't want to, I don't think it should be the main focus. I know that's not what some of you want to hear. Maybe a lot of you don't want to hear. But I'm just telling you, that's not, I'm not here to introduce legislation against it. I'm not here to introduce, go backwards, as you want to say, whatever it is. I'm just here to talk about different things. And the reality is, you know, healthcare is important. There are a lot of billionaires in this world. If you want funding, a gentleman named Jeff Bezos is $122 billion as of today. You want to take it off the table completely? Just have him stroke a check. He won't miss it. It's not even as big as it. He won't even miss it. Yet for people like my mother who go to church every single day, they don't want to fund it. And you have to respect them too. And that's my answer in this category.
All right, but we would appreciate it if candidates would try to be more specific about the particular question. Thank you. Mr. Spencer.
Okay, thank you. I mentioned that I've been in the legislature for 12 years, but I'm not in now, I'm not a rep. I was a representative for 12 years. The first 8 years of that was in another century. So I go back a long way. And after I left that march in Washington the day that Matt Brown was born, I
beg your remembrance.
which will remain a very famous day in history. I worked for George McGovern. I came back. I got elected to the legislature. The ERA amendment was the thing that we were all talking about, and all of a sudden they passed Roe v. Wade. And I'm going to tell you the truth, and that is that a lot of you people, in fact, everybody in this room, it's one of those days. It's not a rare day, but everybody in this room is younger than I am. But the truth of the matter is that Roe v. Wade was very surprising to a lot of people. And I've watched that issue change, mature, go back and forth. I even watched 8 presidential candidates on a stage, and they were asked the question, is it settled law? And every one of them said, yep, settled law, settled law, settled law. I don't like one-word answers, and I don't like one-word questions, and I really don't even trust people who give one-word answers. The truth is, it's not settled law, and that's probably why we're here now. My approach is that we do need consensus. If I am elected governor, of course I'm not a legislator. This is a job for the legislators. But I know that my policy in the legislature was that we need to listen. We men, and we may be 2/3 of the legislature, but the best policy is to recognize that this is an issue that the women should have a decision on in terms of making the law. And the law the details that people want to legislate are going to change from year to year. This year, next year, there'll be a different law. Sometimes it's just poke in the eye legislation. I don't believe in poke in the eye legislation. But what I will do is talk to my former fellow legislators and ask them to work for a consensus.
Thank you. Mr. Brown?
Yes, well, reproductive freedom, in my view, is a fundamental right. It's a right that is under assault all across the country, and it is under assault here in our own state. It is disappointing that the current governor, and this is maybe not well known, but pushed through what the ACLU called the first anti-choice legislation in 15 years, creating not the one plan in the state health exchange required by federal law to not cover abortion, but creating 9 plans that do not cover abortion. My view is that we need strong, unequivocal, and vocal leadership from a governor, and if I am governor, I would provide that in not just to protect reproductive freedom, but to expand it. I believe that is the kind of leadership that we need. So I would work to repeal those restrictions on reproductive freedom that the current governor put in place. I would work for the passage of the Reproductive Health Care Act with all the abilities and tools at my disposal as governor, and would try to make Rhode Island not what it is now, which is an F, according to NABRAL Pro-Choice America, an F grade in terms of reproductive freedom, but to make us an A, to make us the leader we ought to be. 81% of Rhode Islanders support reproductive freedom. Our government needs to support it too. And I would fight for it vocally and unequivocally as governor. That is why today some women leaders from around the country and here in Rhode Island, including Gloria Steinem, including Kate Michelman, the longtime leader of NABRAL Pro-Choice America, released a letter endorsing my agenda on reproductive freedom and my candidacy. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, the next question has to do with freedom from sexual harassment. To what extent do you think current social movements such as Me Too and Time's Up have identified important issues that need to be addressed? If you were governor, what specific legislative proposals will you support in addressing sexual harassment in our state? We'll start with Mr. Caselli.
Great, thank you. Sexual harassment has no place in the workplace, has no place in our government, has no place in state legislatures. There are a few pending bills right now in the House and the Senate that have to do both with sexual harassment and bullying, and again, they need a floor vote so we can see who is supporting those and who is not supporting those. I worked as a grassroots organizer in the State House for almost 12 years. I worked as a part-time lobbyist. I know how to get consensus. I know how to get people to understand legislation and to work around some of the issues that they have been opposing it or approving it. These 2 bills need support. They need your support. They need it now. And I'm going to make a plug for both of those. If you go on to Legiscan or go on to the Rhode Island House or Senate websites and look up those bills, type in sexual harassment or bullying, you'll get 2 or 3 of them. Give them your support. Call your state House legislators, whether you're on the Senate or House side. Tell them you either favor it or you don't. And ask them what they think about that. As governor, I want to make sure that I'm in a position where I can speak for the people. And right now, the people in Rhode Island want these bills to go forward. That's my read. That's my past 3 years being in the House and the Senate, and hearings and working with some of the legislators there. People in Rhode Island want these bills to pass. And as governor, I want these bills to pass as well. Thank you.
Mr. Brogy?
Yes, thank you. I would support any common sense legislation. I mean, the reality is everyone should have a shot, regular career. You shouldn't be harassed. You shouldn't have to be fearful when applying for a job or doing things that, are just happening right now. I mean, you read about it And I think most of us will say, oh, we've heard the terms, casting cows, things of that sort. But I think there's a difference. There's a real difference when you read about what some of these women have been through. I mean, they're talking about, really, horrific stuff. And so I think that we can, in fact, come up with legislation that makes sense. But I do think we need to do the work to make sure that, it has teeth, so that, one can clearly differentiate what it is. I might, again, maybe talk a little too much here, but I want to add this because I believe in common sense legislation and reality. Reality is, I ran a company with 1,000 people in it. You know how many people got married at that company? You know how many people, a lot of people get married. A lot of people have relationships, a lot of people, So I just think we need to be careful what we're really doing also in that area. We talk about one of the biggest philanthropists in the world, Melinda Gates. Well, where did she work? She worked at Microsoft. Okay, that couldn't happen today in this culture. So we have to be careful. And so, I might say things that, I'm not here to get 100 on the exam tonight. I'm here to be real, common sense, and I think there's, tremendous discussion that needs to take place. And women need to know that they can apply and move in their career and do all the things that they're entitled to do just as men and have wonderful careers. Thank you.
Mr. Davidson?
If I could just loop back to and tie this into the question of harassment. Any legislation that pertains to women's rights, or really anything else, but in particular pertaining to women's rights. I know the legislators who are there, most of them now, because I've served recently. And I know the kind of problems that get brought up, and I know the discussions that happen in the back room. And my answer to anybody that asks, or even I would initiate this, my belief, and I want to underline this because it really is important to me, it's about what actually happens. It's not about standing up on a street corner holding a sign, which is a good idea, and I've done that. But it's about real outcome. And my view is that, I don't know the exact number today, but I know that there are 75 members of the House, of whom approximately a third, maybe 23, 24, are women. And sometimes the men aren't interested in listening to the women. And the women will tell me, if I listen to them, that they're concerned that something might come up, and that the men, just by virtue of their numbers, will maybe outvote them or make a wrong vote. So my message to myself, it took me a while to figure it out, but my message to myself and to the other men in the legislature, or if I were governor, the same message to legislators. You have 20 women who think something, you have 2 that think something different, it adds up to 22 women out of 75. We got to listen to the 20 women. And maybe for my next question, I'll say a little bit about the sexual harassment issue, but it is important, those of us, whoever we are, whether it's owning a business or managing a business or being a platoon leader in the Army, or in fact being governor, you set an example. And what I can tell you is there will be no sexual harassment while I'm governor. And if there is any, there will be an ombudsperson in every department, and there will be a personal review of every single case by me, or, depending on who Lieutenant Governor is, by the Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you. Mr. Murray?
Yes, I have personally long believed that there was way more sexual harassment, abuse, and rape taking place than many of us would like to have acknowledged. I think the Me Too movement has played a critical, essential role in exposing that reality. I think we still have a very, very long way to go. I support all of Representative Tansey's bills that were produced by her commission. I'll quickly mention a couple. The non-disclosure bill, I think, is critical, which says that people can't be required to fill out a non-disclosure form, which would make it hard for them to raise issues of sexual harassment once they are employed. I think the expansion from 1 year to 2 of the time period in which sexual harassment charges can be brought is also critical. But I support all of them. I don't have time to go through all of them, but I do support them all. But beyond legislation, I'd say I think it's important that the way we conduct ourselves in our organizations, either as leaders or as part of the organizations, is also critical. I've had 2 experiences with this, and in my experience, what is important is that if you are leading an organization, or part of an organization, that you make sure that everyone understands, without any doubt, that you as the leader want to know if there are any concerns or allegations about sexual harassment. Your only agenda as the leader will be to thoroughly investigate them and address them and root it out if you find it. You will not have any agenda to protect the reputation of the organization or to protect your own reputation in the process. And everyone who's part of it needs to understand that that is the sole goal. So one instance I had was at Global Zero. There was an anonymous posting asserting that there had been sexual harassment without consequence at Global Zero. Even though this was anonymous, a website posting, and even though there were no specific allegations, I instructed my team to thoroughly investigate it. And we did, and interviewed everyone on our small staff. We did not find any evidence at that time in that instance, but we did thoroughly investigate, and I think that sent a clear message. Secondly, just a while later, just very briefly, just a while later, not at Global Zero, but at the media firm that that consulted for us, there were serious and specific allegations against a member of that firm. And I did three things immediately. We severed the contract. We were one of the first nonprofit organizations for which they consulted to do that, along with NARAL, Pro-Choice America. We released a statement that said that we can never tolerate sexual harassment or assault, and it is a violation of the humanity of those who have suffered it. Put out a public statement saying that. And third, we contributed to a fund, contributed to a fund to support those who had suffered from the sexual harassment and help them get back on their feet. So we need to be unequivocal about these things and send the message that we want to know if there are any allegations.
Mr. Munoz.
So no one should be bullied, no one should be harassed, no one should be sexually harassed. Maybe it's because I'm a millennial, but going to graduate school, medical graduate school, there were 70% women, 30% men, and I had the privilege of serving on the honor board with several women. And we never saw a case of sexual harassment. I think it's because we were proactive in educating our peers about what sexual harassment was, defining these things for them. Because I think an element of sexual harassment is ignorance. People really not understanding the limits that they should have in terms of interactions with other people. And just to bring up Maura Walsh, a representative that has advocated for consent coursework in schools. As governor, I certainly am supportive of that type of legislation where we tackle the problem at the early education level, as well as secondary education and at the collegiate level. I also think that there's an element of corruption. Let's be honest, corruption. Corruption in corporations, corruption in government. Those that have power use that power, and those that are afraid of that power look away. I'm running as an independent because I want to tackle this culture of corruption that we have in Rhode Island, which has harmed people. It has taken resources away from programs, such as those that we're talking about now, and it's also left those that have suffered from sexual harassment and bullying in the shadows. So that's what I believe in, and that's how I will confront harassment as a governor. Thank you.
The next question has to do with fair pay and minimum wage. We'll start with Mr. Ferrocci. Studies show the gender pay gap won't close until at least 2058, and that this disparity is directly linked to both inadequate minimum wages and the lack of fair pay practices relating to gender. One, what would you do as governor to address the issue of fair pay policies relating to gender, and what is your position on the minimum wage?
Okay, thank you. The first part, so I'm going to just speak a little bit historically here. So I had a company that had 23 people and went up to 1,200 really, 83% women. My exec team had 11 of the 13 were women. And my partner, as I said, made it all the way to the cover of Forbes last year. Reality is that I looked at things and approached it more like the military. In other words, you're there at a certain pay grade, you're there for a certain amount of time, that's how you get paid. So it shouldn't be about your gender at all. So it'd be based on responsibility, how long you've been there, and overall, where you are in the organization. So that's how I approached it. And I have to tell you, we just broke glass ceilings. Just broke them. I mean, I'm the largest job creator in the state of Rhode Island in the last decade. Don't even have a close second. And the reality is they were all women, for the most part. Excuse me, 83%. And so the reality is that they also had opportunities to then run other companies because they had the titles. Titles are important. I will say this, and I'll get to minimum wage in a moment. Two things happened that I realized were big discriminating. Well, one was really discriminatory. Younger women are discriminated against. And I'll tell you why. Because they don't have families. What happens is everyone expects them to stay late and work all the time because somebody else has to leave early to go pick up their child. Okay? That happens all the time. And they're just abused. They're there till 7, 8, 9 at night. Okay? Because someone's leaving them work. Some of the best employees I had were women who came back in the workforce. Were women who had children that finally got, their driver's license, and they just couldn't wait to get back in the workforce. And they had all that knowledge. Many had an education, other things, and I tell you, they're the best employees ever. And they had responsibilities, titles, and so forth. As far as the minimum wage, yes, I would just say that I'm for a free marketplace, and a minimum wage should just be your first job. I don't understand what that means. I mean, I've had 6 jobs at a time. So minimum wage is a free marketplace economic decision.
Thank you. Mr. Jacobson?
Starting first with minimum wage, yes, we should adopt the $15 minimum wage. But there's something we need to keep in mind about that, and that is that you got to do it when the economy is on the upward side of the curve, which it is now. In other words, this isn't something we could have done 6, 8 years ago, and if we don't do it now, or if we want to change it again in the future, we may not want to pick a downturn in the economy to do it. So, and it's $15, and there's a reason for that, because that works into where it fits in the economy. It's just a kind of an averaging out. We're not going to make it. And we have people from the other party sometimes stand up and argue against it, and they say, well, what if you made it 50? Well, we're not proposing to make it 50. 50 wouldn't work. 15 does work. We should do it. We should do it now. The overall question about fairness to women in terms of wages, there's a lot of built-in problems. For example, it's not really a problem. It's just something that happens, and you have to look for it in order to see it. I have a feeling everybody in this room, I can't see you all because I got this spotlight in my eye, but I think everybody in this room knows about what I'm about to say. I'm not saying you can see what I'm going to say, but it won't surprise you. This college graduates teachers. Is it 3/4 of the teachers are women, or is it 2/3 of the teachers are women? But many of them are women. Now, we all know that. The country of Finland had an education system which was essentially based on agriculture. Kids went to the 5th grade. They changed it. They decided, we're going to treat teachers differently, and we're going to get a better education system. We're going to pay teachers like doctors. They did. So, what happened? Of course, they started getting the best test scores in the world. But I think a lot of it is the attitude. Now, I want to point out, she's not here today, but our governor took away the COLAs from a segment of society, which is called, if you want, educators and public servants. She changed their pensions, and she's unrepentant. I was there. I voted against it, and I have a specific proposal to change it. But we have to do that. And that is not really a completely gender-specific, but it's certainly gender-weighted. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Brown?
Well, I support the Fair Pay Act that would require comparable pay for comparable work. It seems should have been done a long, long time ago. We certainly need to push it through now. I support the minimum wage of $15 an hour. And let me give you just one example of how raising the minimum wage is not just, I think, good for all workers and good for the economy, but especially good for women. Some of the people who I believe do some of the most important work in society are care workers or caregivers, people who take care of the elderly, people who take care of the ill, the disabled, home care workers, child care workers. These are people doing, I believe, some of the most important work in society. I'm sure many of you have had experiences with them and your families. I have. When my mother was dying, we had a care worker who came to our home for her last many months of her life and helped me and my brother and my father. And she couldn't save her life, but she saved everything else you can save about a person. Her dignity, her spirit, even her sense of humor in those last months of her life. This to me is about as important work as can be done. In Rhode Island, care workers are paid on average $11.50 an hour. Well, we had 4 men last year who made over $1 billion running hedge funds even when they lose money. So something is deeply wrong with our system, including our economic system. So a $15 minimum wage would raise the average wage and the absolute wage of care workers in our state. That's just one small piece of how that would help to solve the problem. It would also not only improve their lives and their dignity, but it would also mean that we could attract more care workers, which we desperately need because there's already a shortage, and we're going to have 90,000 more people over the age of 70 in the next 20 years. We're going to need a lot more care workers, and we're not going to get them if we're paying $11.50 an hour. Thank you.
Thank you.
So let me be clear, minimum wage is not a livable wage. MIT has a calculator that accounts for cost of living expenses and controls it for geography, placed on the map, the town, municipality, city. And what it shows is, for instance, in Providence, for a single mother with 2 children, to live, she would need $30 an hour. So when I'm looking at legislation or the idea of raising minimum wage to $15 over the course of 3-4 years, it just seems like we're focused on a statement policy that's not addressing the fact that we aren't bringing jobs that are high paying so that women can truly have that economic opportunity that creates economic justice. As everyone was, hanging out PVD Fest, I decided to go down Elmwood Ave, and there was a big dumpster. And next to the dumpster was a 71-year-old woman playing with her granddaughter. And she was kind enough to speak with me. 71, paying $1,400 a month to barely survive. So when I think of minimum wage, I mean, these stories continue to sink in and seep out, sink in and seep out, and I just really wonder, what are we trying to do here? Are we trying to displace the burden of taking care of people, of creating opportunity on private industry, on small businesses? Because the studies show that 10% increase in minimum wage increases operating costs by 1% for 1 to 2% for restaurants. And we primarily have restaurants here. So I see the vision. I see us getting to where San Francisco is, where studies have shown that minimum wage has been successful. But we need to create opportunity. We need to truly create jobs that are accessible and high paying to really be in a place where I believe that the increase in the minimum wage will not be negatively burden or negatively impact small businesses, but also where they're met with significant, greater opportunities in industry for women to ultimately do better and not just barely survive. So that's just my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosanna.
I have 2 children. I have a son who's 31 and a daughter who's 30. Oh my goodness, almost 33. I would never want my daughter to feel any less than my son in terms of wages or reproductive rights or earning a living or accessing skills or jobs. I would never want that for my daughter. And I would never want that for anyone. I would never want to be in a place where those discriminatory practices seem to be the lay of the land. Fair pay is a messy topic. I read the legislation tonight that's in the State House tonight, and it occurred to me that the language is vague and incomplete. And I can see a lot of opposition to that, and I get it. But what is really encouraging is that there's a bill there in the first place, and that the bill is going to generate a lot of discussion, and the bill is going to be worked on, and committee members have to take a stand. And you get to know just who these people are that are looking at this bill in some way that they're either going to approve it or they're just going to outright oppose it because it's so messy. But the fact is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's messy or not. The value is, the point of doing that legislation is to create discussion. The minimum wage is a problem for me. I've worked for a lot of nonprofits over my life. It didn't take a lot of money for the nonprofits because I believe in the cause and the mission. An immediate $15 an hour raise for nonprofits is going to destroy a lot of nonprofits in our state. We have one of the highest concentrations of nonprofits in all of New England, in Rhode Island. So a very gradual increase to a livable wage, and I'm more inclined to think about that. And I don't care about the number. It could be $30 an hour. It could be $50 an hour. I don't really care. It's going to be a livable wage. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question has to do with the budget, and we'll start with Mr. Dickinson. With the recent cuts in federal legislation that was introduced by the tax cuts, there is a danger that this will affect social programs for women in Rhode Island. As governor, how would you ensure that women, particularly low-income women, are able to participate effectively in our economy as they are vital to the state's economic growth?
Oh, wait, okay, I hope I understood the question. This is a doorway to an issue which I think is really important. We don't control what the federal government does. The governor doesn't control what the legislature does. The governor can influence the legislature and participate. But what we really need is universal health care, and it's not going to be easy, but we really have to do it. And when we do it, or to put it another way, when I get elected governor, if and when I'm elected governor, I am going to devote a substantial part of the administrative staff, possibly with the help of some other elected officials, to find a program, an actual program that can be put into place, not one that they give up on halfway like they did in Vermont and California, but a real one. And that brings some of those issues. We have to work with what we're getting from Washington, but what it does do is it brings those issues into our purview, into the range of our control. And then our legislature, of course, has to approve and allocate the funding, but at least it's something where we brought it here. I believe we can do that, and we can make Rhode Island the first state which has universal health care. It's not going to be easy. And we're going to have to work very hard on it. We're going to have to teach. We're going to have to, maybe put it another way, we're going to have to motivate legislators to actually show up at committee meetings and stay while they hear all the testimony involved. But the governor's office and whoever's proposing it has an equal responsibility, and that is to bring forth something, not just some idealistic thing in 30 blank pages, but something that really would work. And it's going to be very hard to find it. And I hope that, I can't see you all again because of that light that's in my eyes, but I hope that if I get elected, you call me and you say, I was there that night and I heard you. And here's something specific that ought to be in that legislation. We'll talk about it, we'll get it done. Thank you.
Mr. Brown?
Well, wages are lower for women in Rhode Island now in 2018 than they were in 2000. There was an American Express study that just came out that shows that Rhode Island is one of the worst states in the country for women to start a business. This economy is not working for women. And so there are a number of things we need to do. Part of that on the pay issue is what we've discussed, increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Part of that is making this a better place for women to start businesses. I'd like small businesses. I'd like to make Rhode Island the best place in the country to start a small business, including and especially for women. One way to do that I would put in place is what some other states have done, which is a graduated corporate tax rate. Right now there's a flat corporate tax rate. So the largest corporations pay the same tax rate as a very small business. I would do a graduated rate where we repeal some of those extreme tax cuts on the large corporations and provide some relief, some tax relief and fee relief to the small businesses, which I think would help women in the economy to a large degree. And the third thing is that the two fastest growing parts of the American economy over the next 20 years are clean energy and healthcare. I think it was a big mistake that the current governor made to cut Medicaid on top of the cuts to Medicaid that Trump put in place, President Trump. It's bad because it hurt people who depend on Medicaid. It's also bad because it hurts the healthcare economy. As we've seen, our providers, our hospitals are closing. Some are looking at selling themselves to out-of-state corporations. We'll be driving up Route 95 for the procedures that we need. Doctors, nurses, etc. will be gravitating out of state. So I would restore the Medicaid funds, partly because it's the right thing to do for the people who depend on it, partly because it's the right thing to do for the economy, and many of the workers in the healthcare economy are women. And we need to be leaders in the healthcare economy, not forfeiting it to other states. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think in order to change a culture, it should start in the governor's office and the executive branch. And I think one way of doing that, ensuring equal pay, is really starting to structure these employment contracts around metrics, performance metrics. I also believe that any company receiving a tax incentive or a break should adhere to the suggested framework for, in terms of performance metrics, justifying their pay and ensuring that it's objective in nature, not some subjective form that someone fills out just to propagate their own thoughts. Now, if companies don't want to submit to that, then they don't have to receive tax incentives or some type of public resource. In terms of helping women at the small business level, I've stated this before, I want to redirect Commerce Rhode Island and really start focusing incentives on our small businesses. And what I think is that companies that access these incentives should have some type of social impact initiative. So it isn't only a matter of improving access to entrepreneurship or starting a business for a woman, but it's also about businesses that want to scale, want to grow, need resources, embedding within their company culture resources that help, for instance, mothers who need daycare, whether it's alleviating some of the cost of that or embedding a daycare within their company, depending on the size of it. I think it's about restoring family and building community, and it really does begin with women. So anything that I do as governor ultimately is about changing the culture to the extent that the executive branch has a say. Otherwise, I'm there to fight for you and to advocate for you, but as we all know, it does take a governor that's willing to speak out and confront corruption to do that. The current administration is not. I don't necessarily see any particular party candidate saying that they're willing to, but as an independent candidate and a governor, I will. Thank you.
And I'd just like to say I'd like to apologize because I didn't identify you as an independent.
No worries. Thank you.
Mr. Rousseau.
So let's be clear. Historically, women have been thought of as second-class citizens. And we've been training women over the years to be accessories. And we're at the point now where we've got to get beyond that. We've got to get beyond thinking of any class of citizens as being less than any other. So I want to start training women to be entrepreneurs, business leaders, and business owners. That's where they need to be. I want the Office of Economic Development to start funding those types of cooperative type arrangements, whether they be co-ops or individual businesses. Let's put the state money back into what the state is designed to do. Help the citizens achieve a better life. And the way that happens is to stop funding corporations, stop funding big businesses, stop funding everything from slaughterhouses to whatever else that we've been trying to attract here. And instead, move some of that money into helping our own citizens. There's a bill, there's a piece of legislation that's been on the books for decades. And it has to do with the 10% procurement. In other words, 10% has to go to either disadvantaged people of color, 10% and it's never been enacted. It's never been enforced. It's been on the books for a long time. That needs to be changed, and as governor, I'm going to make sure that gets changed immediately. And last but not least is two good friends of mine, Linda and John in Johnston, trying to start a new restaurant, a new business. If you could walk into their restaurant, look at their wall right next to the cash register, they have 15 different permits that they have to pay. We tallied them up one day. It was about $12,000 that they have to pay each and every year to state and federal agencies, state, federal, local agencies. How can a business start and grow with those types of figures? As governor, I would change that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Perosi?
Now you're going to meet Giovanni Ferosi. I'm a leader, okay? A lot of what you heard right now, I tried to use these cards in a couple of minutes, but then I said I was going to come up.
I want
So-
to remind people, you're welcome to use these cards if you go along,
Got
if
it.
you want to give a rebuttal. We have a lot of time for that.
Appreciate it. Yeah, no, I knew I was coming up. But this is the reality, okay? You need leadership. You need to create jobs. You need to create companies. You need to hire people. You need to not discriminate. You need to hire the smartest people, those willing to do the work. I will tell you, flex time should be incorporated in the real world now. This is a reality. You know, there's plenty of companies that can handle it, have the communication tools. I gave everybody an iPad, everybody an iPhone. Work wherever you want to work. I don't care. Just do the job. You know, I don't discriminate. I don't discriminate based on sex. I don't discriminate based on age. You could be a 23-year-old and be in charge. Okay? You could be an older person and be in charge. Whatever. Reality is I hired someone once and she made both other executives cry. They both came into my office crying. I'm like, what's going on here? Like, oh, she's tough. She's better. So what? Do the job. Look up two things. Look up in Inc. magazine, The Disciplined and the Divine. It's an article, it's important for you to read. Talks about leadership, talks about my leadership. Also look in Forbes, The Bengal Billionaire. Talks about what I did. Okay, these are important things. A lot of people talk. You all care about your families, you care about yourself. You vote for me. Enough of this talk, enough of minimum wage and all this other junk. Okay? What you want are jobs. High-paying jobs. I'm going to create that. I'm going to bring in the blockchain. I'm going to get rid of the DMV. I'm going to get rid of things that don't cause disposable income. Remember those two words. It's all about disposable income. Every time you get a fine for a red light or going to, you know, whatever it is, it's fines and fees and taxes. And I appreciate that. I'm just going to get yelled at for about 10 more seconds here. But it's all of that that's going to cause you to not have money. So think about it. They want to talk about getting you to $15. Who cares? I want to try and get you most money in your pocket. And then once you have the known, then you know if you need a second job. Then you know if you need to get something else to get you the amount of money you want to live on. Thank you.
I think we have a rebuttal.
Okay. 30 seconds?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A minute. 1 minute.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone
Well,
else?
Also,
you know, as someone who started a small business, medical device business, as a non-practicing medical doctor, seeing the, I would say, consequences of financial distress and how it leads to chronic disease and poor healthcare outcomes. You know, I just want to disagree and say that this is just about bringing jobs or just about thinking big and thinking Inc. You know, the reality is we need to edify people. We need to edify people. And what edifying people means is, yes, starting at the secondary ed level, but, you know, building those vocational skills where they become the talent pool that industry wants, not just investing in another large company or a building that we hope to fill in our dreams. I mean, this is about building our children up to be entrepreneurs, our older adults repurposing their skills so that they can access higher paying jobs and ensuring that they have adequate and good health care. If we do that, people will start businesses, and if they fail, they will start them again. But if we don't do that, then all it takes is another big company to fall, another 38 studios, right? And then we're back in the same place. It's about edifying people.
rebuttal?
Yeah, you know why 38 studios fell? Because you mandated how much people should make. You mandated that everybody has to make $70,000 and they had to have 400 of them. That's what made the whole thing collapse. You have to understand how business works. More importantly, you have to understand me. Stop making excuses, okay? Giovanni Ferozzi's an immigrant who grew up in West Warwick, Rhode Island, above a bar. I worked at Jerry's Supermarket. I had 3 paper routes. I roofed houses. I did lawns. I refereed basketball. Okay, I went with my mother to the factory. No one helped me. What I did is help myself with a known. How much is school and stop raising tuition? How much is this and stop raising the fee so I can register my car? How much is this so I know how much I need to make? Okay? Get Rhode Island where it needs to be. The best state in the nation. And stop all this nonsense with, we're going to all keep the minimum of everything. We need to be the best, the highest.
Anyone else? All right, final question. I'll start with Mr. Brown, and we'll just go along. The summary question is this: what one other thing would you do as governor to advance gender equality in Rhode Island? And please address that question specifically.
Well, I would say two things. I think that we need to people in leadership. If I were governor, would need to do two things to advance gender equality. One is that one needs to govern with that commitment. And in this state, I think some of the most important priorities are restoring Medicaid funds that disproportionately hurt women, repealing the restrictions that the current governor has put on reproductive freedom, because that has hurt women, and of course the mismanagement of UHIP has disproportionately hurt women. So one needs to lead with policies and the way that one governs. One also needs to lead by being inclusive and bringing people of all backgrounds, bringing women into positions of leadership up and down throughout government. When I was Secretary of State, I came into the office, it was 60 people, almost all men, almost all white. And one of the first things I did was to hire, one of the best things I did, Nellie Gorbet as my deputy, who's now our Secretary of State and doing a fantastic job. And I asked her to set a policy going forward that everyone that we hired would be 50% women and 50% people of color. Now today, that's become more normal. At the time, it wasn't done. In fact, it was so unusual that the resume book that we created in the search for positions to be filled by women and people of color became a resource for the state. So I think one needs to lead with one's priorities and policies, but also by bringing women into positions throughout government, including into leadership positions. Thank you.
I would agree with that statement and just add that we need more women of color in positions of leadership as well. We need diversity across the board. I think that we also need to, again, increase the amount of opportunities that are accessible by women. Right now, even when we look at our retraining programs, those that are the most visible, while anyone can access them, there's still, we hear about electric boat, we hear about welding. There certainly are people that choose that path, but what about a diversity of opportunities? 10, 12 different things that people can then access. We have certification type roles like medical coding, people that can reapply the clerical skills they've learned in their earlier professions to new ones. And I'm talking generalities, but the truth is that these professions do have a certain, so there are certain professions like education where there are proportionally more women in the profession than men. And those professions carry certain skills that we can reapply into other areas. So when we tackle these challenges, and I would say the culture and the place that we are today, the state of Rhode Island today, I think that it takes a governor that understands, yes, recognizes that there are injustices and inequities here, but also is willing to fight to create a path to opportunity. And a path to opportunity, I'm sorry, it is not just a policy statement. It is something that is accessible, that is quantifiable, and that is sustainable. So that's my perspective and what I would bring to the governorship as governor. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Russell?
When thinking about gender equality, I have to go back to my mom. Okay, now I'm going to talk about my mom. And way back when in the 50s and early 60s, she was an entrepreneur. She had 3 kids then and decided that she was going to go back to school. And she went back to school at a very old age at that point, around her 30s, and got a nursing degree, got an RN, an LPN, I'm sorry, licensed practical nurse. And as a licensed practical nurse, she worked the graveyard shift from 11 to 7 and lying in hospital, taking care of the preemie babies, the premature babies. Gender equality is something that I learned about way back then, because both parents, both my dad and my mom, worked really hard to raise a family. And we all felt that. As governor, as somebody who wants to lead a state, I want to make sure that the next time we meet in 4 years, I want to see a panel full of women up here and a bunch of men sitting in the audience. That's what I want to see. Because if I can do that in the next 4 years, if I can change the character and the faces up here and there, then I've done my job. This is a critical time. This is our moment. And I want to encourage you, and I'm going to say this in terms of whatever we talk about, you have the power. You're the ones who are going to make a decision, whether it's one of us or somebody else out there. But you also have the power at the municipal level, at the House and the Senate level. Learn about these folks. Try to figure out if they agree with you, and if they don't, vote them out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barocci.
Everyone thinks I'm hardcore, and then I have to follow Paul. It's like a double whammy. But no, he's literally one of the nicest people I've ever met. And everybody on the panel, thank you. I have 4 words really. It's workplace flexibility, professional development, child care, and leadership training. So that's what I would focus everything on. Workplace flexibility is just something we can achieve. And it all comes down to communications. And some people might, laugh at me when I talk about just blockchain and other things, but I'm serious. I'm talking about, putting Wi-Fi across the state of Rhode Island, having mass mobility, plugging in